If you feel like your memory sucks and that there's no hope that it will ever improve, that's probably because no one handed you the key to what mnemonic devices really are and how to apply the right ones to the memory issues that you are trying to solve. Because when you get it right, the mnemonic devices I'll share with you today will fix everything. And by everything, obviously that sounds like an exaggeration, but I think I really do mean everything. For example, I'll teach you a way to not forget that you wanted the scissors when you walk into a room looking for the scissors, because that can be very demeaning. You move from your office downstairs and then all of a sudden you're like, what did I come down here for? There is a technique for that. And if you want to pass exams and you're dealing with abstract concepts, there's a mnemonic device that will help you with that specific goal. But we need to face facts first. It's not that your memory is broken. It's just never been trained properly. And I mean trained in the specific ways where you know the exact right mnemonic device needed to get the job done. And then you use the right tool for the job, and bang presto, you can enjoy perfect, or at least near perfect, recall. So stick with me, because in the next few minutes over this video, I'm going to hand you the keys to the absolute best memory techniques ever devised, and even better, I'm going to give you free access to my Mnemonic Devices Starter Kit. Once you have all of the mnemonic devices in front of you, you will never be bored by information again. So as we begin, let's get a nice and sparkling clear idea of how we're defining mnemonic devices in the first place. And that's important, because if we don't have the right definition for what mnemonic devices are, how are we ever going to get down to the best possible mnemonic devices for the kinds of things you want to remember? So as far as I'm concerned, mnemonics, basically anything that helps you remember better, is a mnemonic. Even the dictionary says that mnemonic devices are anything that assists or intends to assist your memory. But is it really as simple as that? No. There's actually a big problem with the idea that these techniques are devices, because using them always involves an intentional process. As memory expert David Berglas made clear in A Question of Memory, memory is not a unitary mechanism or a thing. As Berglas puts it, memory is a behavior. Whenever we talk about a mnemonic device, we also need to consider how you will use it procedurally. So let's say that you've just left your home office to go down to the kitchen to get a pair of scissors, and you forget that that's what you went for. How are you going to use a mnemonic device to stop that from happening procedurally? Well, the mnemonic device in this case is to close your fist and say scissors, scissors, scissors as you move through the door. And that's a very, very powerful way of doing it. But notice that your hand may be the device, the word scissors may be the device, but it's the process that matters. Now, why does the process matter? It's because when you walk from one room into another with an intention in your memory, well, the temperature changes, the color of the light changes, or the intensity of the light changes, and your brain suddenly has to deal with all kinds of calculations. And so it will deprecate whatever is in your mind in order to make space for all those processes. At least that is one possible scientific explanation for what's going on there. And so this procedure, which involves mnemonic devices, is what helps you override the all of a sudden overwhelming new stimuli that want to get in the way of your intention. So that's a very, very simple example. I sometimes call it the fist technique. And you don't have the scissors, so you make a fist as if you had the scissors in your hand, and you imagine yourself feeling it. Then you walk through the door, and now you can hold that memory with you as you move your way to wherever it is that you keep the target in your home. Let me give you another quick example, which I think will dimensionalize for you later on the difference between that mnemonic device and some of the other mnemonic devices that you will use for learning, for example. And this really gets into the nuts and bolts of what mnemonic devices can be, the range of the things that they can be. So if the fist is one kind of procedure that helps with one kind of goal, How about remembering what you read? Well, there's a mnemonic device for that I use personally, and for each number between 00 and 99, I have a specific mnemonic device, or what I often call a magnetic image. And as I read books, I note the page number, and procedurally, I keep that image in mind as I'm reading, and this initiates or switches on a magnetic anchor that helps draw all of the information on the page towards the mnemonic device, which is essentially an image in my mind. For example, I've never forgotten that on page 69 of The Snowball, Warren Buffett advises us to always know what the deal is in advance. And that memory of it being on page 69 is not particularly useful, but the quote itself is useful. And the reason why I remember both the quote and the page number is because I have an image for 69. Now, I know what some of you must be thinking. Well, what if it's page 398? If you have images for 00 to 99, how are they going to help with that? Patience, magnetic friend, we are getting there. And I know we have doubters amongst us, and many people are very skeptical of memory techniques. So methinks that before we go too deep into the mechanisms of these various mnemonic devices and how they work, we had better spend a moment or two substantiating our discussion by looking at how mnemonic devices work in the brain. And so I welcome you to the neuroscience of mnemonically and magnetically assisted memory through the use of mnemonic devices. As a technique, which is what mnemonics are, they are a technique that involves devices plus processes. Mnemonics leverage your visual memory, your auditory memory, your spatial memory, and other natural types of memory. I can give you a very long list, but the important thing is to understand that at a very basic level, research shows that what mnemonics do is to create stronger connections in the brain, and not just in one area of the brain, but multiple areas of the brain. So we can look at scans that help us see this. Here's what weak memories look like in your brain where you have not used a combination of mnemonic devices and procedure. And you just see a very limited amount of brain activity. But when you use mnemonic devices to help create stronger connections in the ways that we're going to talk about today, it's going to have a very different picture that the brain scans create, and you have much stronger memory because you have much more brain activity in many more areas of the brain. So one of the most impressive mnemonic tools that we're going to talk about is the memory palace. We'll get into it later, but what I want you to know for now is that it is very well studied by scientists. And one study that really drives home this point is in the brain science journal Neuron. And as that study shows, memory palaces helped people go from recalling an average of 30 words from a list of 72 to remembering more than 60 words. In other words, using a very specific mental tool helped people double the amount they could remember. That's mighty impressive. And there's more scientific angles to explore. I talk about them a lot in the Magnetic Memory Method project, but you get the point. So let me turn now to the kinds of things that mnemonic devices can help you learn. Because remembering your scissors is one thing, and it's a very important thing when you don't want to waste time and you just want to go from your home office to a location, get what it is that you need and get back. That's one mnemonic device. Now you know it, the fist. But it's possible to memorize just about anything that you want to have using mnemonic devices that are learning focused. So it could be the names of the planets, facts about those planets. It could be poetry. It could be scripture. It could be phone numbers. It could be names. It could be things related to nursing, pharmacology, whatever medical terminology you want. It could be the names of products, which can help you get a raise or a promotion at work. It can be self-help tips that help you develop mental strength or make better decisions, like the RAP technique discussed in Decisive is the name of the book by Chip and Dan Heath. An amazing technique. Man, you could memorize dance moves if that is what floats your boat. Frankly, there's literally nothing I've ever seen that mnemonics can't help you remember. In fact, when I was invited to moderate at the 2003 Pan American Memory Competition, the top memory athletes used a combination of the techniques we're talking about today to memorize cloud formations. In other words, It's even possible to memorize abstract shapes when you use mnemonic devices. Isn't that exciting? I've never needed to memorize cloud formations myself, but one of my favorite professional examples of how combining a variety of mnemonic devices helped me achieve something big that did involve abstractions involves a TEDx presentation that I delivered a few years ago in Melbourne, Australia. You see, it not only involved the speech itself, but it involved Sanskrit, and it involved a concept that is discussed in the ancient Sanskrit. So I delivered my talk, I had quotes in English, I had some Sanskrit that I recited, and the idea itself, the concept, which I had to understand. And what's more is on the day that I delivered this speech in Melbourne, I memorized the names of the people that I met, and I became deeply familiar with them, and that was a specific application of the techniques. So we'll get more into these details about the difference between the speech-oriented mnemonic devices versus what you would use to memorize people's names. The key thing is the right mnemonic for the job is what you need to understand, and it's going to be so beneficial for you if you really put in a small amount of time to study these differences, as we're about to discuss, because the payoff later is going to be huge. Okay, have I convinced you yet? One of the reasons why I put so much into discussing the science is because I know I needed a lot of convincing myself when I first learned about these techniques, as do some of the best mnemonists. We've seen it time and time again. People are skeptical, and it seemed impossible to me that having things like associations for numbers so that you could have every page essentially work like a memory palace could offer so much. It just seemed like a lot of time to spend on something that has no particular promise. But here I am, a completely improved person thanks to what these techniques have done for me, and I can't stop myself from sharing it with others because the transformation was that deep and that positive. So with all that in mind, let's get into some of the best mnemonic devices you can ever hope to use, noting that there's no perfect place to start. When people ask me, where should I start? I always say the memory palace. But for today, we're going to ease into the memory palace and start with, I think, one of my favorite and most engaging mnemonic devices of all, and that is personally created flashcards that have a couple of special principles baked into them. And when you use these principles, or at least experiment with them to see how they will work for you, I think you're going to see that the difference is night and day. It was my friend and language learning expert Gabriel Weiner who inspired me to start scribbling on index cards after I read his book Fluent Forever. And basically, instead of just downloading software put together by a stranger and a bunch of cards that other people have put together, what you do is you get some index cards or just paper and some colored pens. And I added some of Tony Bazan's ideas to the mix and just started to create cards like these. And, in case this isn't obvious, before creating cards, you also organize the information that you want to memorize too, because where preparation meets opportunity, there's no ceiling. So one of the ways to optimize using personalized flashcards is to make sure that you have what it is that you want to memorize all organized in advance. This could be facts for a test, or words for a language that you're learning, or symbols for coding, or the names of important authors, you name it. What you do is you essentially create associations on the cards that remind you of the target information that you want to recall. I did this a lot when I passed level 3 in Mandarin, and this is one of my cards, and it has some features baked into it. So, for example, there's no answer on the back, right? And there's a reason why, and that's because the rules of active recall, which is a scientific term that shows how we can form memories faster, is that you need to test yourself. You need to challenge yourself. You need to make it a little bit difficult. And so I have to solve this puzzle in order to remember what this word means, which in this case means content. So there's a horse there, and the horse is saying neigh, which is part of the sound content. And then there's Mr. Wrong there, who is a bassist that I was very fond of when he was playing in a band. So content, neigh wrong. And this card is a little bit more detailed than this, so we'll get back to it. But it doesn't have to be language learning. I also memorized that this symbol means condition in a non-classical logic that I studied, and it's the same principle. There's no answer. Have to solve the puzzle. I don't remember stuff like this without some kind of mnemonic device to intervene on the process. These things take seconds to create. Maybe that's an exaggeration, a minute or two. But the principle here, too, is having a minimum of 3 colors. And that's a Tony Buzan idea that he has in mind mapping that I transported here. And I find it very, very useful, even if I can't explain why. I think part of the reason has to do with a little bit of interleaving that you are injecting into the process, and maybe also some diffuse thinking. So those are terms in learning science. Diffuse thinking basically means that when you take the pressure off and you get a little bit of a break, the cells in your brain have more space between them to bounce around, which may, when you then put the pressure back on, lead to better formation. So it's kind of like wax on, wax off in the Karate Kid movies. You just have a little bit of a pause there between the actions, and that builds the skill, or in this case, the recall. And then interleaving is just switching between topics in order to get a benefit. And the other thing to consider is, and we'll get into this a little bit later, is that memory palaces are not divorced from the cards. They can be used in combination, but in a way, each card is kind of like a little mini memory palace unto itself. And that has to do with spatial memory. And you're creating associations in space or on a space. So it's a very, very foundational technique. The point is that you need to do it in such a way that the associations remind you of the target information. So we'll get into this in a little bit more detail later, but the idea of drawing an air conditioner to remember the symbol of condition, well, this is an alphabetical link. So more on that later, but keep in mind that you're not just drawing random stuff. You're trying to use a mnemonic device on or in a mnemonic device, the alphabetical mnemonic device on the flashcard device. And over the years, I've talked about using index cards in many, many different ways, and people have expressed a concern that I would like to address, which is, I don't want a bunch of cards flying all over the place. Isn't that the magic of the internet and digital devices, where we can just store everything in total cleanliness and on and on and on? That's totally valid. I mean, it is nice to not have dusty cards all over the place. I would agree. But does it really promote memory? I don't know. That's an individual decision. I have found for myself that more digital exposure creates digital dementia and digital amnesia. It doesn't help me remember at all. And the idea of clutter, please don't let that dissuade you. You can easily wrap your cards up in a memory palace drawing, just like the one you see on the screen, which I used when I completed my Mandarin level 3 and passed it with flying colors. And, the memory palace is there the way that I wrapped that up. But I also store my cards in plastic bags, which I then organize into shoe boxes. And it's easy peasy lemon squeezy. The most important thing is that the organization itself, because it gets your hands involved and you can use principles like alphabetization, you're giving yourself an extra layer of mnemonic encoding. Remember David Berglis, it is not a unitary mechanism. It is a process, a procedure. It's a behavior. So with that in mind, let's look at another mnemonic device I don't use that much, but I want you to know about it, and that is acronyms. And acronyms are very, very powerful when you deploy them in a particular way. We all know and use acronyms all the time. FBI, CIA, CBS, even TEDx Talk. What is it? Technology, Entertainment, Design. That is a acronym that we know. And we can strategically use acronyms in some very, very powerful ways. So for example, I gave a TEDx Talk, and in that case, I did not use acronyms. But when I go and give quick talks at local businesses, I use acronyms a lot to construct the speeches that I give and to deliver them from memory. So, for example, I often talk about memory techniques, and I don't necessarily say this to the audience, but what I'm thinking in my mind is FREE, F-R-E-E. And then I unpack that as I deliver the speech, and I teach about the rules that will help set you free, which is frequent practice in a state of relaxation and a spirit of experimentation will keep you endlessly edutained through education, and educate you endlessly. And that, is unfolded in a much longer talk, because I talk about what each of those points mean, but I don't need to memorize the speech verbatim. And it's just a wonderful way to memorize presentations, to create some kind of acronym or abbreviation for yourself. And it is a mnemonic device in that sense. So you can think about how to do that in your own studies. But why do they work? Well, part of the reason why they work is because acronyms are a form of chunking. And so what's that? Well, chunking is a memory strategy, but it's more process-oriented that helps you break information down into smaller groups. And when you do this, you're following something that's called Miller's Law. And George Miller was the psychologist who basically discovered chunking or identified it. I think that our ancient ancestors noticed it long before the scientists caught up with it. But basically, it's the idea that 7 plus or minus 2 items can be held in working memory at any given time. And memory athletes, of course, make use of this principle often, and they often break it. But at the end of the day, we can use this as learners. And acronyms are a great way to break larger pieces of information down or chunk them down into manageable components. So I don't do it this way, but I think a lot of people know for the planets. My very excellent mother just served us nachos or something like that. Or hibiscus versus Pac-Man leads to victory for many reasons. And that's something used for the vaccine schedule. And, there's all these kinds of things. Onward, 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 to travelers. And foxes very greedily verified ascending happily, which has to do with memorizing the cranial nerves. Now, some people get away with acronyms like that. Personally, I find them too long and vague. For example, if we think of the planets and the idea of mother and pizza and all that sort of stuff, well, what's the connection between mother and Mercury? There really isn't one. Mother doesn't sound like Mercury. So in addition to creating a memory palace, what we would want to do is have also a much stronger sound relationship between the target information in the acronym and the image that we're using to create the association. So we're going to cover these aspects next with the memory palace in mind. But before we do that, in case we haven't met, this is Dr. Anthony Metivier from magneticmemorymethod.com, where I do cool things like making the Mnemonic Devices Starter Kit for you, which is going to detail a lot of this in greater depth for you and give you a plan for how you can start to implement the behavior of having these techniques in your life. So if you're new here and you love detailed discussions about accelerated learning techniques like acronyms and memory palaces and flashcards, get subscribed. And for the love of memory, hit that thumbs up. And I mean, really hit it so that all the planets hear it. And we're going to move now into the memory palace technique. So what is it? Well, it's very, very ancient, and it's related to all the techniques that we've been discussing for the reasons that I mentioned with cards, being that cards are spatial. And the memory palace uses space as a core mnemonic device, literally the parcel of land or the square that makes up the floor in a room. And you can start understanding it by just getting into the process of using the technique right now. Think about a familiar location to you. It could be the room that you're in as you watch this. It could be the bus that you're sitting in if you're commuting. And all you need to do is mentally, although let me condition that in a second, just start to chart out a logical journey that does not take energy from your memory. And what I mean is, don't think of any location where you don't remember the location, where it's vague or anything like that. Think of one where you do remember it, and even if you can't see it because you don't have a mind's eye or anything like that, just make sure it's familiar enough to retrace mentally what journey you would take from, say, a bedroom to a kitchen to the front door. A memory palace works best when it's based on something like that, where you can just reconstruct a journey. A lot of people, they say, oh, I'm going to have to go and memorize locations to use this technique. No. That's something else. That's a memorized palace. It has its place, but frankly, it takes too much work. So don't worry If you can't remember each and every detail of a location, focus on the aspects of a location that you can remember. So for example, I once visited a bookstore in Zamalek, which is a part of Cairo, and I just make this simple memory palace that is getting a little bit old and worse for wear, but I don't remember every single part of the bookstore. And that's perfectly fine. As you can see in my drawing of it, I just used the parts of the bookstore that I do remember, hence a memory palace. And to reduce the cognitive load even further, I make this drawing and I number the stations. And the reason to number these stations is not that I'm going to memorize them, although sometimes I will do that for certain learning goals. No, it's just to make sure that I'm getting into the 10, 11, 12 area number of stations. So a station is each spot where I'm going to move throughout the memory palace and place associations. So if we were using an acronym like the free acronym, F would be on 1, R would be on 2, the first E would be on 3, and the fourth E would be on 4. And then I would just have images that help me remember those points moving through. Or if it's the TEDx talk, just the images that allow me to remember the words verbatim. Now, here's a problem that I get a lot. People say, well, I'm not an artist and I can't really draw. This is not drawing. It's a word that I use because I am drawing or dragging a pen or a pencil across a page. This is more like a chicken scratch. It's purely for planning purposes. It's not meant to be high art. Do not make it an artistic activity. And just notice that when I'm doing this, I'm often using an index card. Why? Because it makes it easier to store for quick reference. It also means that they can be alphabetized. But I don't always do it that way. I sometimes draw my memory palaces in little notebooks like this or larger notebooks. The key point is that it is planned in advance in order to weed out potential problems. Set it and forget it, so to speak, although in this case we would say set it and remember it. Now, another cool thing about index cards, though, is that you can have a memory palace index card and then individual cards stacked together with them, and then that makes it that there's a kind of connection between them, and you can literally sit here as you're learning the memory palace technique. Later you won't have to do this, but you can sit and learn and go, okay, so I can look at station 1 with my eyes, and I can look at the little magnetic imagery that I drew, and I can think this is happening on station 10 or whatever it is. And this can help you learn this technique very, very well. Obviously, you don't want the answer. You want to test yourself. You want the image that you create to produce the answer by solving the puzzle. So here, in my poor artistic skills, we have Batman and Robin, the dangerous duo. Well, duo sounds a lot like what that Mandarin character sounds like. And then in a memory palace, it is located in a specific spot. Bang presto. Memories formed, test passed. It's beautiful. You just can't get better than this. And you can sort through your cards in different orders, and this leads to an extraordinary ability to remember more faster. It is truly magnetic. Okay, I've been talking about associations as we go, and one of the key associations is to have a direct link. So if you need scissors, you close your fist around imaginary scissors, and that is now an association, a one-to-one correspondence, scissors to scissors. And then I've shown you some magnetic images like an air conditioner for condition, and Batman and Robin for Dua, and these kinds of things are powerful. But let's go a little bit deeper into the specifics when it comes to associative imagery, linking, and what is sometimes called the peg word method. And inside of any memory palace, what you'd want to do is place a list of mnemonic associations that you assign on a station-by-station basis, on a point-by-point basis, that is ultimately not just associations, but very strongly multi-sensory associations. So I breezed over, if you'll forgive the pun, how exactly I made the mnemonic for the condition symbol multi-sensory. So let me explain that a little bit now. I applied the magnetic modes, and the magnetic modes are literally switching through a variety of multi-sensory experiences. And I use a formula, and that formula is cave cogs, spelt with a K. And basically what it is I go through a kinesthetic sensation. So I literally feel like I'm holding this, I don't know, Triton or something like that in my hands, and I feel the cold wind of the air conditioner blowing over it. And then I hear what that sound is like. I get a visual image of it. I get Nick Cage in there because he was in a movie called Con Air. And, you get a little bit of a pun that the air conditioner and con is in there. The process just moves on from there, adding an emotion, a concept, a olfactory and a gustatory sense, which is smell and taste, and then a spatial sense. And you can study a lot of how this works with an additional 20 magnetic modes in the Magnetic Memory Method Masterclass. The point is to make a process of assigning associations as quick as possible. And what you're doing is you're forging links based on the alphabet. You're making alphabetical associations that go as deep into the word as possible alphabetically. And all you have to do to prepare your mind to be able to do this in a flash is do a simple exercise. Write out the alphabet from A to Z. Then assign a dynamic figure from the dynamic duo, for example, to each letter. So A is Al Pacino. A can also be Adam Sandler. It can be Adam West, who played Batman once upon a time. It could be Anna Paquin. There are some people who use these techniques who are very strict and make sure that they always have a male and a female for each letter. And they sometimes have a male and a female and an animal and a vegetable and a fast food restaurant. Like they may place a number of conditions upon the production of these images. So Arby's, I think, would be one fast food restaurant. I don't go that far because I can often just generate these on the fly. But the reason I can generate them on the fly is because I have, and I do every so often, a couple times a year, just write out a new list to incorporate new associations for each letter of the alphabet. That way, I'm constantly kept in practice, and I have as many possible associations as possible for each letter. Now, I know when you're just getting started, it could feel difficult to come up with these associations. It may be that you haven't spent enough time reading as much as other people have, or you don't much care for movies or TV. That's just the way it is sometimes, but you can get started. Or maybe you do read a lot and you watch a lot of movies, but the chain of association in your mind has gotten rusty. So what is the oil that deals with the rust? It's just getting started. And you start with what you've got. And then you apply these techniques to memorizing more things. And then you pay attention to what you've memorized. And now you have more to work with. So if you don't have a letter A, some people tell me they use me as the letter A. And that's very, very wonderful. I'm honored. But if I didn't have one, I would just pay attention to the next movie I watch. Let's say it's, The Elephant Man, and I notice that Anthony Hopkins is in there. Well, I'm now going to make Anthony Hopkins an A. And if I have to, I'll memorize his name. It's a self-expanding system as long as you start expanding it. And, you come to letters like X, and a lot of people say, I just don't know what to do with X. And I always point out, well, okay, I admit, I'm lucky. A friend of mine named Kane X Fauché for Xavier happens to have that in his name. But I don't stop with luck. I've got Xenophon, Xerxes, and Tipia, and a couple of them, Xanth, the land of Xanth, Xena, the warrior princess. And I keep looking for more opportunities to add, again, the key. And I mean literally the key that unlocks all the doors is to get started. And once you get started, to stop stopping. Be consistent. This is a peg word system, and mine wasn't built in a day. Yours doesn't have to be built in a day either. And not only that, developing it never ends. And so once you're on the road, stay on the road, and essentially you'll be able to link very, very easily, because linking is something that we've been talking about all along. We're linking celebrities to each letter of the alphabet, and then if we need to memorize something, we then link those celebrities to the target information. Now, they don't have to be celebrities. They can be friends. They can be doctors. They can be lawyers. They can be teachers. They can be politicians, if you can stomach them, and all kinds of people that are rummaging around in your psychological laundry. Use them, right? And some people say, well, I don't want to think about certain things. And I often just say, well, wouldn't it be easier to feel more comfortable about the reality that we live in, where we do have to think about all kinds of things we would rather not think about, and just lean into it and use it? That may not be for you. Your mileage may differ, but I throw that out there for you. In any case, I recently memorized a new word, which was roarback, I think, R-O-O-R-B-A-C-K, and it basically means a defamatory falsehood that's published for political effect. So it's not a celebrity, but I used Roger Rabbit. And I believe in the scene, he's with the actor Bob Hoskins, and Hoskins is trying to force him to take a drink. And so in my little mnemonic image here, in a memory palace that starts with the letter R, I have Roger Rabbit basically being forced to take this drink, and he publishes lies about Bob Hoskins in this newspaper. And so roar back, and he's roaring as he's writing it in order to really get that in there, and then apply cave cogs. So there's a kinesthetic feeling and all these sorts of things. And this foundation of applying the technique in this direct way means that the sound and the meaning of the word can be memorized more or less in one blow with minimum revisitation to the memory palace, because the more you get into these layers of mnemonic devices through alphabetical association, linking, and then triple linking, so to speak, the alphabet to the figure and the figure to the memory palace, then your mind is already set up to remember so much better. And then when you do go to the memory palace, it's not like you're visiting a movie. It's more like you're a theater director and you're asking your associations to play their part and to perform the target information. And you might say, well, that story there that you told me about, Roger Rabbit here, that sounds like the story method. Is that the same, or is that a different mnemonic device from the memory palace and from linking and so forth? And here's the thing about mnemonic devices. They're all tied at the hip. They're all spatial, right? And one of the ways that you can use them in a way that proves that they're all spatial is to use Roger Rabbit as a memory palace unto himself. So Roger Rabbit could be standing right here behind me, and I can use him as a memory palace inside of a memory palace. And that would be to apply a number system to give him a number of stations on his body, and then we follow it through. Anyway, it can be quite confusing if you don't have structured study and so forth. So consider making sure that you get into a program to really bolt out what you're going to do, complete individual courses about all the different kinds of mnemonics, and you'll begin to see that there is a lot of identicalness, if that's a word, between these techniques, but you'll know when to use the particular variations for which kinds of things. So the story method, if it differs at all, is that it kind of allows you to throw a broader mnemonic narrative over a larger list of information. So if I'm at an event and I memorize all the names of the people there, I'm going to cast a kind of larger narrative as I go through the list. And part of why it works is because our brain is wired for story, right? Stories automatically help you create strong cause and effect associations, and they get stronger and stronger when you have alphabetical associations and that you lay out those associations in a memory palace. They make recall so much more effortless, and in fact, it can feel completely effortless. So one of the times I was at a meeting in Brisbane, the names were Haley, and then Alan, and then Sharon, and Andrew, Edward, Sam. Oh, sorry, Edward was there representing Angela. Yeah, so Angela wasn't there, but Sam was there. In any case, these are the actual names that I memorized while giving the presentation, and there's a kind of use of the story method because Haley's comet is crashing into Haley, and then that has a kind of effect that crashes into Alan, who has an Allen key that he's turning in the ear of Sharon. So it's a story that's playing itself out through space. And, Sharon is not Sharon who was sitting in front of me, but it was Sharon Osborne, which is very, very strange. And this Allen key in the hands of Alan, I'm also thinking of Alan Funt, I think was his name, who was the host or one of the producers of Candid Camera. So it's just a variation of the same. But I would remind us that the device is used as a process, as a behavior. So with that in mind, let's turn now from memorizing things like names and words to memorizing numbers, because it will help you understand why that it's a variation on the same. And yet our brains organize information in a different way, so we need to have the number techniques also operate to respect and reflect and connect and help us direct the ways that numbers work in our minds by using mnemonic devices for numbers just a wee bit differently. The first mnemonic device for numbers we'll talk about is a rhyming peg system, or what you might call rhyme mnemonics. And they can help you amplify your stories if you're using stories, or if you're just using them as direct associations. It's the rhyme that is the mnemonic device in this case. And some scientists call this phonological encoding, which is a great term. Basically, to use it, what you need to do is create a system of rhymes for yourself. And in English, you only have so many options, really. So 1 is a bun, 2 is a shoe, 3 is a bee, 4 is a door, 5 is a hive, 6 is sticks, 7 is my friend Evan playing Stairway to Heaven, 8 is a gate, 9 is wine, and 10 is a hen. And, you know, the thing with my friend Evan playing Stairway to Heaven, a lot of people just rhyme 7 with heaven, but I find heaven just too abstract of a concept, so I add a condition that makes it more magnetic. Anyway, there's different ways to use number rhymes. For example, if you have to remember a list, you can just associate the first item with a bun and the second item with a shoe and so on. And you are essentially making a tiny story. If the first item is a carrot and you put that carrot in a bun, well, that's weird and memorable. And you could apply the cave cogs. Feel the crunch of expecting a hot dog, but all of a sudden there's a carrot. And, you know, likewise, you have lettuce in your shoes. You could physically feel the lettuce in your shoes as you try to put your shoes on. So always combine these techniques for the best results. So that's number rhymes. The next thing is a number shape system. It's not that I would ever not use one for the right job, but my favorite really is the number image association, or it's the one that I favor over number rhymes personally. And that's just imagining different shapes and associating them or linking them to numbers. So you think about what 0 to 9 looks like, and you associate each digit with a shape. It's not available yet, but I teach this simple system in the Mystery of the Magnetic Numbers, the first Memory Detective Junior book, but I'll share with you my list right now. 0 is a donut, 1 is a candle, 2 is a swan, 3 is handcuffs, 4 is a sailboat, 5 is a seahorse, 6 is fishing hook, 7 is a boomerang, 8 is a snowman, and 9 is a golf club. And now we have a beautiful set to make lots of little stories with when we have to remember simple numbers. And so if you had 77, it would be 2 boomerangs. If you had 12, it would be a candle and a swan, right? And you can come up with all kinds of different stories for long digits just on that image shape basis. There's no right or wrong way to use it so long as you're getting the effect. And that's the beauty of memory techniques. It's 100% scientific. You either remember things or you don't. Anyway, really explore the number shape and the number rhyme techniques and see which you prefer relative to the nature of the information that you're trying to memorize. Because I think number rhymes are usually going to be, for most people, useful for simple lists. But number shapes, you can use directly for numbers. And you can combine number shapes with the alphabet. So if you park in B7, for example, then you can have Batman with a boomerang or a batarang, and it can smash the window of your car in your imagination, of course. And then you'll remember that you were parked at B7. That sort of thing is a very, very useful way to employ that kind of technique. But we can get even more sophisticated by learning something called the major system, where we now associate an abstract consonant with each number 0 to 9. So if you look at the image on the screen, you'll see a method or a means of associating a consonant with each digit, or a number of consonants for some of the digits. So 0 being a soft C, S, or Z, and 9 being a B or P. This has been in use at least since the Katapayati of ancient India. So don't feel like, you can't do it. It's been around for a very, very long time, and humans love this kind of thing, and it's just a great way to help you remember numbers. So take a little bit of time to just commit this to memory. And if you think that it might be hard, just try this. 0 being a soft C or S or Z. What I did to remember that is I imagined Cookie Monster reaching through a snake that was snoring with its own tail in its mouth to soften a cookie. So soft C, the snake is S, and the snoring Z, right? Soft C, S or Z. Just took seconds. 1, T or D, well, T and D both have a single stroke in them. N has 2 strokes. Noah took the animals on the ark in pairs, so 2 is N. These kinds of things can really help you. I won't give you every single solution because that would be bad teaching. You need to challenge yourself a little bit and think, what would be magnetic for you? What would make this stick? And, well, what are some of the uses for this? They never end. Remember when I told you about having an image for each page in a book? Well, that is yet another variation, which takes the major system, the linking of consonants with numbers, to what's called a 00 to 99 PAO system. PAO stands for person, action, object. I'm not going to get into every nook and cranny of the PAO, but basically what you do is you take the major system, and rather than just stopping at 9 is B or P, you go to 0, 9. And so now 0 is a soft C, S, or Z, and so I have Brad Zup. And so we have 0 and 9. What about 99? Well, I have the Pope because 9 is B or P. So we have 9 and 9, the Pope. Of course, not the Pope in Rome. I use the Pope from the band's Ghost because he's just a little bit more animated in my imagination. And so there's lots and lots of examples that I can give. 01 is the sad tragedy mask. 02 is the sun from the movie Sunshine, specifically thinking about the movie poster. 31 is a maid. I often use the mad mascot dressed as a maid in my imagination. 86 is a fish, and on and on and on. And what we want to do is try to make these images as concrete as possible. Like I just said, M and D for 31 makes maid. It's really the most obvious word for me, but I take it to the level of the mad mascot dressed as a maid. Now it's not a concept. Now it's a physical thing in the world that has specificity. Same thing with the sad tragedy mask. Instead of just thinking about it abstractly, I think about where have I seen a real tragedy mask? Where could you see one and have a lot of fun doing it? Well, William Shatner played Oedipus Rex in a movie where all the characters are wearing these masks throughout the entire play. So you have to listen to hear that it's William Shatner's voice. But nonetheless, that's who it is. And so I use him, and every time I have 01, that's sad. But it's not the concept of sadness. It's William Shatner in the tragedy Oedipus Rex. And so I don't have to rebuild a story all the time, because the reference is to a story. That Warren Buffett quote that I gave from the Snowball, always know what the deal is in advance, being on page 69. Well, 6 is a ch or a j sound, and then P, B for 9. So in this case, I often think of a Japanese fighter jet, and it's just crashing into that page with Warren Buffett on the wing, and he's like, oh, I didn't know the deal in advance, and now the whole thing is crashing, right? Very, very simple. It makes evocative memories, and now that page is like a memory palace. Now, I know this is all fine and dandy from pages 00 to 99, but what about page 100? What about page 101? Well, let's take 101, because we were just talking about our friend William Shatner. Well, he's wearing a tragedy mask, 01, so what if he's holding a candle? That's the number shape image applied to page numbers. What if it's 201? Well, now it's William Shatner with a swan. What if it's 301? Well, now it's William Shatner with handcuffs, right? And if you go to 401, William Shatner's on a sailboat. If it's 599, then the Pope is interacting with a seahorse in some particular way. This is fun, it's fast, it's easy, and it does not require me to develop a 3-digit system or higher, because for a 5-digit page number, if I ever find one, then I would just use a 00 to 99 PAO twice, and then I would add a number image either at the beginning or the end. And this has been the perfect solution for me, because I originally started developing a 3-digit system. I think I got to 247 or something, and I just realized this is too much work. I could just go 24 and then have a boomerang, or I could do 2 with a swan and then use the 47, which is often Dwayne Johnson, The Rock, because 4 is R and 7 is K. In any case, this mnemonic device is so amazing, but it's really a series of mnemonic devices all woven together. And there's a way that I'll be talking about eventually in my program for people who are part of the inner circle of the Magnetic Memory Method Masterclass, how to turn a 00 to 99 PAO into an 1,000 station memory palace system. It's very, very powerful, and I hope you don't miss it. But for today, I've got one more incredible mnemonic device for you. But remember to stay tuned for the Mnemonic Devices Starter Kit. It's going to help you incredibly when it comes to making sure that you are able to take what you're learning today and put it into action. Action, action, action. Action reveals what stasis conceals. So make sure you're moving forward. Because I know a lot of this can melt people's minds. But the whole thing is that it becomes knowledge when you start to actualize it through action without getting caught with the but questions and, oh, my mind is different kind of stuff. Well, yes, your mind is different. That's the beauty of it all. But the reason why we can have this conversation today is because there's enough similarities for the transfer of information, as consciousness over here speaks to consciousness over there. Okay, so speaking of consciousness, let's talk about Tony Buzan's mind maps. And I mentioned him before with the 3-color rule. He was one of the greatest innovators of mind mapping, but he says in Mind Map Mastery that he abandoned this mnemonic device as a mnemonic device back in the 70s. And I was astonished when I read this. I thought, this is a little bit more premature. But he wanted to focus on using mind maps to help with creativity, with problem solving, with planning, which is absolutely fantastic. Pick a focus, stick with it, and amazing things will happen. But I thought about this, and I thought, well, actually, we can combine mind maps with the principle of the memory palace. And so all you need to do is make a clock-like structure. You can make it more elaborate than a clock, but a clock gives you 12 stations from 12 o'clock to 11 o'clock, and you go around, and it's just a beautiful thing. The most beautiful thing about it all is if you have your 00 to 99, then 12 o'clock makes the word tin, or whatever word you choose for T and N, because 1 is a T and 2 is an N. And so now at the 12 o'clock position, I have tin, tin. Then at the 1 o'clock position, I have an image of the Hoover Dam, 1 and 3, T and M, and on and on and on. And you then just place what it is that you want to memorize, and you can follow along with a kind of mind map memory palace. It's a lot of fun. I don't use it for many things, but it can really help you do it visually in front of your eyes, especially if you're someone who doesn't have a mind's eye or don't feel very, very strong in your imagination. You don't have to. There's always a workaround. Remember, memory is not a unitary mechanism. It is a behavior. So dive into each of the approaches you learned today. Really dig deep into their nuances through practice. And let me know if you found this guide helpful in the comments. And while you're there, use the link to grab the Mnemonic Devices Starter Kit. Or you can just go to magneticmemorymethod.com, MDSK, which is a mnemonic acronym for Mnemonic Devices Starter Kit. That's magneticmemorymethod.com/MDSK. Oh, and before we go, hang on. If it would be cool with you, I'd like to leave you with 2 more very cool concepts to explore. One is the number system that I have already been talking about, and it's just a simple thing. You know, you can apply the numbers to every page in a book to help you remember them. But you can also, if you want, apply them to your cards. So if this were the 12th card, well, then whatever it is you want to imagine, you just use your image for 12 to interact with the target information. So you can apply these things in many, many different ways, and that's an additional tip for you. And you can wind up making each and every flashcard you ever work with in the future as memorable as you would like it to be by adding an additional layer of mnemonic elaboration. The trick is to really, really understand the memory palace technique. And to that end, the second thing that I want to suggest to you is to take everything that we've talked about, grab that guide, and then immediately go watch right now, or at least bookmark, my detailed video tutorial on how to use the memory palace technique for studying next. When you really get this correct and you understand the Mnemonic Devices Starter Kit, everything in there, creating a little wheel of activity, this tutorial, it's going to make your memory stronger and stronger and stronger still. Thank you as always, and until next time, keep stoking the fire of your love for learning. And as I always like to say, keep yourself magnetic.